Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our regular council meeting held on August 26, 2024, being called to order at 6:01 p.m. May I please have a mover? Moved by Councillor Cressman, seconded by Councillor Martin. All those in favor? That carries unanimously. The recommendation is that a closed meeting of council be held on August 26, 2024 at 6 p.m. at the Wilmot Administrative Complex in accordance with Section 239(2)(f) and (a) of the Municipal Act of 2001 to consider the following. Planning matter under Section 239(2)(f), advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose, and Prime Minister Path Statute Storage Option, Section 239(2)(a), the security of the property of the municipality. May I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Sadhu, seconded by Councillor Martin. All those in favor? That carries unanimously, and we will return at approximately 7 p.m. We will reconvene into open session at 7:06 p.m. and continue with the agenda as presented. May I have a mover, councillors? Moved by Councillor Cressman, seconded by Councillor Martin. All those in favor? That carries unanimously. And I will turn it over to Councillor Martin for a territorial acknowledgement.
We have gathered in Wilmot Township on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Mississauga peoples. We also want to acknowledge the importance of the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, a peace agreement made between Indigenous nations before the Europeans arrived. It characterizes our collective responsibility to each other and Mother Earth. We should take only what we need, leave enough for others, and keep the dish clean. By acknowledging this covenant and the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, we are reminded of our important connection to this land where we live, learn, and work together as a community.
Thank you very much, Councillor. We do have two additions to our agenda this evening, and they're both delegations. We will get to the delegations once those appropriate topics come up this evening. And the adoption of the agenda as presented for August 26, 2024. May I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Cressman. All those in favor? That carries unanimously. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest this evening? Seeing none. Our minutes from the previous meeting of July 29th, 2024, regular council, and the August 12th, 2024 special council meeting are presented, and the recommendation is that they be adopted. May I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Wilkinson. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? That carries unanimously. And we have one presentation this evening, and that is the Community Services Master Plan Situational Analysis Report. Tracy McQueen, Jennifer Rowlands, and Terry Allman of McQueen Galloway Associates is here to present that. Are they joining us virtually? Okay, they are joining us virtually. They'll be on in just a moment. Director Catania, would you like to introduce them before they start?
Thank you, Mayor Solomon. The presentation and report is to provide council with information and an update on the Community Services Master Plan and to inform council on the key findings from the situational analysis report and surveys. Draft recommendations will be presented early this fall for the approval of the Township of Wilmot's Community Services Master Plan. MGA Consultants is attending this evening to make this presentation, and on the line right now we have Tracy McQueen, Jennifer Reynolds, and Terry Allman. I'll turn it over to MGA.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Councillors. Before starting, I just wanted to do a microphone check. Everything good?
We can definitely hear you on our end, and we can see all three of you. Thank you for joining us.
Since we are virtual, I would like to do the presentation, and my colleagues Jennifer Reynolds and Terry Allman are also on the line, and they will lead the Q&A if there is any. This way our 10-minute, presentation will be very productive and smooth. So let's get started. Once again, thank you for the opportunity to present the summary of the situational analysis report that's related to the Community Services Master Plan. And I guess I say next slide. The master plan for the township involved three distinct phases. Phase one, the development of the situational analysis report, the robust engagement process involving council, staff, the community leaders, and residents, and three, the development of the Community Services Master Plan. Tonight, we're focusing only on the first two phases of the process. Next slide. What is the purpose of the situational analysis report? Or we call it the SAR. It's fundamentally and foundationally the exercise that focuses on the point in time regarding the township's community services. before we can make meaningful and actionable recommendations over the next 10 years, we needed to understand where the township is in its current state. And the SAR does exactly that. It should be noted that there is absolutely no recommendations formulated at this point in the SAR. Rather, each section, it contains a summary of key findings that may or may not result in a recommendation. There's over 10 sections in the SAR, and on the slide you can see just a preview of what some of those sections are, ranging from the community profile to the financial analysis to organization, structure, and everything in between. Next slide. MGA and the township value the community engagement. Together, we employed a multifaceted engagement strategy to obtain insights from the key community leaders, participants, residents, and staff and council. We had virtual, we had in person, we had small groups, we had large groups, and an online survey. As you can see from the list on the slide, it was robust. Next slide. The findings from the situational analysis report, combined with the feedback we received, it was evident that we uncovered some distinct themes or key findings that will help us serve as we build the draft master plan. Let's share some of these key findings with you. I think they're on the next slide. Right. Asset management planning, program facility optimization, underutilized halls, ice pad needs, capital and operating resources, volunteer sustainability, and program expansion. In the SAR, which is, as you can see, a very comprehensive report, you will find all the data, both the quantitative and the qualitative findings for all these key findings. Sorry, I said that wrong. Next slide. So how will we set up or build the master plan? Our next steps are to have recommendations, and then with those recommendations, there'll be timeframes, short-term, medium, long-term, and the expected outcome for each of those recommendations. And these recommendations would be in 7 areas: aquatics, asset management, community centers and halls, the ice pads, parks and outdoor facilities, programming and events, policy administration, and communication that are on the right-hand side. Next slide. So in September, we will be back and we'll have a presentation on the service delivery report, the draft community services master plan. And then after that presentation, we'll go out further for some targeted engagements. We will make those edits from the feedback that we've received, and then the final community service master plan will be ready for council to be received. One more slide, next slide. And that concludes sort of the brief overview of the situational analysis report that's in your agenda. And then we wanted to make sure we had some time to answer any questions that any of you have.
That's great. Thank you very much. Councillor Cressman.
Yes, through you, Mayor. I guess going back to the second last slide, is there opportunity to test the targeted outcomes with the community? Is that part of the phase, or is it strictly presentation to council?
Yes, we're more than willing to look at that. In our original proposal, we had just the one large community engagement that we had the end of March to the beginning of April. But with the Director of Community Services, we can explore that further.
Director Catania?
Through you, Mayor Solomon, to Councillor Cressman, yeah, there will be some targeted outreach as well. Even with the draft recommendations that are in play, we'll be liaising back with some of our service clubs, community groups as well with those recommendations. And MGA is going to be doing some other targeted engagement, but I'm going to be taking the lead when it comes to some of our other groups.
Any additional questions at this time, councillors? Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair, again, appreciate the report, and I remember our conversation well, so again, I appreciate the time you guys put into this. I did see a section further on in some of the details that you've provided over regarding the data. Will we have an opportunity to see expanded data? Is it possible that we can get detailed data that we can potentially manipulate as well, because it would be interesting to maybe see some breakdowns in terms of age groups or demographics or areas where people lived, and then apply different filters to that. Like, will we have access to the data that you've collected from the surveys?
Yes, thank you. The survey was conducted through SurveyMonkey, and there are capabilities for you to do that.
Director Catania?
Through you, Mayor Solomon, to Councillor Wilkinson, that's something as well with the consultants we can pull, and I can get some more data in more detail when it comes to the different wards if you like as well.
Very good. Any additional questions at this time, councillors? Seeing none, thank you very much for all joining us virtually, and we look forward to welcoming you back in September. Thank you.
See you next month.
Very good. This evening, we do have 2 registered delegations who wish to speak on matters listed on this agenda. When we get to those items, I will call upon the delegates when it's their time to speak, and in order to maintain a respectful and orderly environment during the meeting, I request that delegates follow the below guidelines, which are please do not interrupt councillors, staff, or other delegates while they are speaking, refrain from making derogatory remarks about councillors, staff, or others, and do not use hate speech or defamatory comments. Although it is rare, I'd like to remind delegates that the failure to adhere to these guidelines may result in their microphone being muted or removal from the meeting. Please keep in mind that each speaker has a maximum of 7 minutes to address the meeting. Like I said, I will be calling up our delegates once we get to those agenda items. Correspondence this evening. Did anybody want to pull any items? Okay, seeing none. Consent agenda. Would anyone like to pull any items before we vote? Okay, seeing none. The recommendation is that consent agenda item 12.1 be approved. May I have a mover, please? Moved by Councillor Sadhu, seconded by Councillor Martin. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. And we will jump into our first report, and the recommendation is that report CS-2024-18, Community Services Master Plan Update and Situational Analysis Report be received for information. To get this on the floor, may I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Sadhu, seconded by Councillor Wilkinson. Director Catania, if you'd like to make additions to the presentation we just had on this.
Through you, Mayor Solomon, really no further comments at this time, except that from a staff perspective, we do anticipate to come back to council the second cycle of September to present council with the draft recommendations that are going to be forming part of the master plan. And at that time, we're going to have our consultant group that'll be in person as well to answer any questions. When we do that at that process at the end of September, we're also going to be, as mentioned, to going back out to the community with some targeted outreach and to make sure that we're really hitting it and making sure everything is accurate that we need to for those recommendations in the master plan.
Very good. Any questions, councillors? Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair to Director Catania, I assume you're familiar with the news that was announced over the weekend regarding the province potentially providing funds for refurbishment of old facilities and some other items and updating as well. Based on the data that you've collected here that you've seen, I mean, do you anticipate that your group will likely be looking to access some of that funding?
Through you, Mayor Salonen, to Councillor Wilkinson, correct, the Sport and Recreation Infrastructure Fund, the township will be making an aggressive push to put application in for both streams.
Follow-up, Councillor Wilkinson.
Through the chair, as a follow-up here, will there be opportunity for us to consult on that in terms of maybe where we'd like to see that money directed, or at this point, is it more so just a situation where you have to apply for it, hope that we get it, and then we get to spend it afterwards? What is the process?
Through you, Mayor Salonen, to Councillor Wilkinson, we have to be really targeted in our approach to that grant, so we have to be specific on what we're looking for. Obviously, we've received a grant previously for the New Hammer Community Center, which we're doing a feasibility study on to make sure that, you know, it's feasible to look at any type of construction to that facility. But with these two streams, what has just been released, up to $1 million for any type of repair, revitalization. So there are some targeted assets that we have in community service from a replacement perspective, excuse me, that we will be looking at making a targeted push, you know, for that $1 million, but as well, there's up to $10 million for any other type of a sort of newer or renovation infrastructure that we can definitely make use of. Specifically, when we look at the data and the results from the master plan and we look at some of the potential infrastructure needs as we grow, there's a case that could be made to push for those facilities.
Any other questions at this time, councillors? Councillor Cressman?
If it, through you, Mayor, just to Director Catania, I think we had the opportunity to meet with the minister and we're aware of the 200 million. I guess the question that we had was at 20 million a pop for some of these needs, that really represents 10 projects across 444 municipalities in the province. So I would say that's a bit of a faint hope clause, but that's just me speaking.
Director Catania.
Through you, Mayor Salonen, I think the other thing that council would probably appreciate is when we get into the fall and we're looking at some of our asset replacements or even at the budget cycle, there'll be some add-ons that we'll do. We'll inform council for that, you know, if we're making it, well, not if, but we are going to be making a push for that grant funding, but we'll inform you formally through a report to council so that you're aware.
Any other additional questions, councillors? I suppose my only question, Director Catania, is obviously going through some of the initial findings, there's a lot of increased want for services, which will have an impact on budget. How are we going to be looking at both the master plan and then aligning it with the budget so that we're not passing something unrealistically that might not follow budget pressures?
Through you, Mayor Salonen, great question. We are going to be presenting the service delivery review as well with the draft master plan at the second cycle of September, so they will align that way when it comes to really a strategic push for some services that are, you know, if we're looking at additional dollars, we have to make sure that we have a financial strategy and plan, obviously working with my colleagues around the table, including our CFO here, knowing that any infrastructure or any services that are going to increase the budget, we need to plan for that and make sure that we're not doing it all at once, but, you know, we can spread this out over the lifetime of the master plan.
Very good, thank you. Seeing no more questions, I will invite up our first registered delegate for this evening, and that's Sandy Glaze. Sandy, you will have 7 minutes to address council regarding our Community Services Master Plan update. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, and thank you for letting me speak tonight, Mayor Salonen, the councillors, the staff of Wilmot, residents of Wilmot and Waterloo. What I wanted to talk about, I was looking at this Community Services Master Plan for the handout that we just saw, and what I realized is we have a Wilmot Township Strategic Plan, we have a Region of Waterloo Strategic Plan, we have a Regional Official Plan from 2010, that was to cover the year 2030. We have a Smart Region Waterloo Plan, and now we have the Community Services Master Plan. And given that a new subdivision is going in right around the rec center, what is starting to come up, we're getting more and more information about what is happening at these rec centers when they have the universal bathrooms. And unfortunately, what it is an incredible number of sexual assaults that are happening. And with the community expanding and all of these people coming into this area, for the 100 acres in Ward 3, what steps are going to be taken to make sure that this doesn't happen? And one of the biggest problems they have is the number of change rooms that they limit. And we've spoken as well in Cambridge, they have the same design going in. So that's where I'm making the parallel. So they're having teenagers assaulted in Edmonton. We have another one in
Sandy,
Surrey, BC.
I'm sorry, just to keep germane onto the topic, right now, what was presented to us is a very high-level overview of our community services master plan. It's not getting into the schematic details of what is happening in our actual facilities.
But it is happening in the rec centers, is what I was trying to say. That's the rec centers that this is all happening, and given that there's so much more building going up around the rec center, what are you going to do? How do we protect everybody? And I hope everybody understands the spirit that I'm saying this in, that's about protection in the first place.
Sure, absolutely, and I agree that safety of our community is a very important topic. I would just say in terms of what's before council tonight, it's not exactly aligned. I get the point that you're coming from, but I would say that that would be a conversation better to have with our director offline probably. I'm sure he'd be more than happy to discuss what we have and what measures we have in place to ensure the safety of our community.
Okay.
Was there anything else in relation specifically to the analysis that we heard from our presenter earlier?
No, there wasn't
and
enough,
the
but maybe I can
findings?
come back another time and be able, because there's more things going on in the community that I think warrant people's attention when you're looking at what they're promoting on this here one. It's in Baden Library, and it's at the Wilmot Resource Center, and they're promoting pedophilia on this government-sponsored sheet, and I think people don't realize this. And I think they need to know more about it. But if we're going to be building, maybe I can come back at another time and be able to expand on this.
Okay, and I would most certainly suggest that you reach out to Director Catania, as he'll be able to share with you the information and protocol that his staff are taking as well.
Thank you.
But thank you very much, Sandy, for joining us. Councillors, I will now call the vote. All those in favor, this is receiving for information this evening, and that's carried unanimously. On to item 13.2, and that is the Township Roads Needs Study. The recommendation is that council hereby receives a summary of findings from the 2023 Roads Needs Study, and that council approve the consideration, the budget scenario number 3 with $800,000 road assessment-based capital needs per annum as identified in Table 3 and increasing by 20% for the 10-year forecast. To get this on the floor, may I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Sadhu, and I will invite Director Molyneux to introduce the report.
Thank you, Mayor. This report summarizes the road needs study that was conducted in 2023 and 2024. The needs study is intended to provide council with an indication of funding levels that we need to maintain or improve the road network condition. The overall network condition at the time of the field review over 23 and 24 was considered to be fair, and that equates to approximately a 56 PCI. So PCI is a term that we use to judge, I guess we'll say, the road condition, and it looks at a number of different factors that when we do assess the road, we look at a number of different things to come up with that type of a score, and it is a standardized process. This report should be viewed as an asset management network level report in that it will primarily review existing inventories and use characteristics, and it will outline funding needs to meet network condition targets, to meet level of service goals. It's intended to identify funding envelopes under specific scenarios to address network conditions over time. And so you can see that within the report that we have looked at 3 different scenarios. There are a number of different scenarios that we could have looked at, but we did want to look at a few that we thought would be somewhat realistic, and particularly when we're looking at the one that's proposed, we do see that as a very realistic scenario that we could see implemented through the course of the budget. It is not intended to be a segment-based plan, even though the report does include these items within the appendices within the report. And certainly that is something to help guide staff when we do our capital planning outlooks. However, that is not something that we would stick to certainly on an annual basis, considering that we do have conditions that change frequently. We do have characteristics of use that can change frequently with traveled pathways and volumes of cars, and so we do look at those as guides, but not something that we would stick to over the course of a 10-year plan. The report looked at the funding scenario requirements to improve network conditions. In general, looking at a phased approach is what we are recommending, and certainly we are here to answer any questions tonight. I did have a few comments about the lengths of reports that have been attached to this agenda, and so certainly I'm here to answer any questions should you have any. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Director. We will go over to Councillor Cressman first.
Through you, Mayor, to Director Mullinax. The only challenge I have with scenario 3 is the fact that the roads get poorer in the initial phase until they start to improve. And I don't want to use the vernacular, but we seem to be kicking our repairs down the road, so to speak. And I'm wondering if there isn't a bit of a hybrid that we could, certainly we stretching it over 20 years makes it more palatable, and I like where we end up. But I'm a little worried about the front end lack of repair that might come back to bite us. And I realize it's all about resourcing and having money in the budget. But I'm wondering if that front end, at least we could keep conditions stable up to 2031. I guess 2031 arrives back to where we started, but that would be my concern, is that valley in between 2025 or 2024 and 2031.
Through you, Mary. So the intent of this report is to show you what investment levels will get you from a condition standpoint. If we're looking at increasing that condition level sooner, then we would need to invest more sooner. And so that's really what we're looking at and presenting in terms of a phased approach. What we started with is a funding level that's slightly higher than what we've had annually. And so if we wanted to look at conditions to improve instead of decreasing the condition, then we would look to ask for more funding on the front end of the plan.
I was about to say, Director, Councillors to do.
Thank you. While reading this report, and just generally seeing the roads in disrepair, as some of them are in Wilmot, I was more inclined to lean towards scenario 2 of, I know it's a larger upfront cost, but if we can start tackling this issue that's already been kicked down the road for far too long, in my opinion. However, with the higher upfront cost, I would be more comfortable going down that road when we are closer to budget season to kind of see where finances are at and kind of see the pressures it would put on our budget reports and finances for this year and moving forward. But to Councillor Cressman's view, scenario 3, although it does stretch it out, I feel that kicking the can even further down the road, it's although it is almost $19 million cheaper, but I think over the term we could end up having more problems with our roads. So my thinking is, I don't know what the rest of their councillors think, is let's be a little more aggressive with our improving our road system and investing more into our infrastructure. But I would be more comfortable doing that I wouldn't be comfortable doing that until we see a whole budget breakdown of what our finances are looking like.
Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair, to Director Clark, I guess the question is based on any of these scenarios right now, do we have any preliminary indication as to if we plug these into the capital budget, how that might affect the potential ask of our tax base? I mean, I know we're, 6 to 8 weeks outside of budget season. I know we have a brief report on the capital plan right now before us this evening, but do you have any indication as to what that could look like in terms of each scenario?
Through you, Madam Mayor, to the councillor. Director Mullenhouse and I did sit down and discuss the impact of the various scenarios, and obviously the more front-ended we put this, the higher the tax rate increase is, obviously, in the initial years. We haven't mapped this into the overall budget process. I can tell you, just for perspective, a $120,000 increase is a 1% tax rate increase. So when you put that in perspective, if we're talking about, in scenario 3, even we're looking at least a 1.5% a year increase to implement that over the period of time. And if you get more aggressive than that, you could be looking at 3% just for roads. So just for roads. And on top of that, we have needs when it comes to facilities, fire, as well as ongoing pressures in other areas. So that's about the best I can do at this point, but it does help you put it in perspective that you're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.5% to 3% tax rate increase for any of these scenarios.
Is there a follow-up to that, Councillor Williamson?
Through the chair, thinking out loud here, I'm wondering if this might be something, and I suppose a question to Director Mullenhouse is do we have time to wait on this until we have budget deliberations when we start talking about levels of service or new spending programs? Is this something that if we were to wait and then debate further after seeing a more robust budget laid out in front of us, can we afford to make a decision then?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'll actually take that one. I think the critical thing here to remember is that the recommendation is to, if I quote it here, approve for consideration. So really what we're looking for here is a direction that we'd like from council in terms of which one are you most comfortable with us costing out. Obviously, we'll bring back an impact of the other two, but costing out and planning all 3 scenarios the way that a budget would be laid out is a lot of labor-intensive work, and so what we're hoping to get is some direction on the path most likely that we can bring back to you, telling you, if you wanted less, then this is what we would move out, and if you wanted more, this is what we would bring in. So ideally, we could get a direction from council about which scenario you'd like us to plan around, given that at budget you will ultimately be making the decision about moving forward or not.
We will do a final follow-up for Councillor Wilkinson, go back to Councillor Cressman, and if you would like to comment again, Councillor Wilkinson, you can after.
Sure. Through the chair, I can appreciate that there's labor attached, obviously costing out each plan. I guess the thing is I appreciate the information being presented up front, and here we have options, but I have no relationship to what the budget is going to look like and what we may be able to actually bring forth to our constituents. So I personally have a hard time sort of deciding, hey, what fits well? Maybe we pick one tonight, but in 6 weeks, 8 weeks, that changes. What I'm sort of offering up for thought and something that I'm considering now is, do we push for a deferral of this and have that conversation and sort of look at the overall costing of each option? I mean, I think we're in a situation where when it pertains to budget and spending, we actually do need to have a real deep look at what our levels of service are, what programs we're actually spending money on, and that could potentially mean either cuts or we make a different decision after seeing the whole budget. So I appreciate you're sort of looking for direction tonight. I don't know that I'm comfortable providing that without seeing a more holistic picture. That's my thought. Not a question, just my thought.
Councillor Cressman?
Through you, Mayor, looking at scenario 3, the decrease in PCI from what I would judge is about 55 down to, 50? What is that significant, or is that you know, what does that look like out in the township, so to speak?
Through you, Mayor. So that, I guess, just in terms of where that sits on the deterioration curve. So what we look at for road assets essentially is that when you're in a fair condition, you're kind of in the middle of your curve and approaching sort of the bottom end of your curve, but it drops off quite quickly towards the last few years of the life cycle of your road. And so if we do have a network that is, you know, in the fair range, so in the 50 to 60 range, and it does start to deteriorate, it deteriorates much quicker than it would if it was we'll call it a younger asset. So what that looks like essentially is that we would probably have more maintenance associated with that. We're going to have more potholes to address and more patching to address and stuff like that for a few years. And then certainly when you get to the reconstruction phase or the rehabilitation phases, those jump up quite a bit because now you're starting to address some of those conditioned roads and taking that bottom end of the PCI away, if you will. What it would look like is you have roads today that you probably hear are in poor condition. That's what's being told to you. That's how people feel when they drive on some of the roads. Those roads very likely would get worse. And so if we do have a higher funding level, we can start to address some of these locations that have those conditions and address it sooner. But that is really the reality of investing in your roads. If we're going to maintain the, we'll say, historical funding level, the road condition and the network will get worse.
Councillor Sadhu.
Yeah, just my final thought. Things never get cheaper, and if we have the opportunity to be aggressive and really address these issues now, I think that is something that we should seriously consider. I am in favor with Councillor Wilkinson of, if we are going to make a decision that is going to have such an impact on the tax base, I would like to see the budget prior to making a decision on this. Personally, I am leaning more towards scenario 2 of more of an upfront cost, where after year 6, it reduces our deficit by 84%. So, like I said, things are only going to get more expensive, and if we keep waiting, it's just going to keep going up and up, and that's where my mindset is at right now.
Councillor Cressman.
Through you, Mayor, in terms of some conversations we had in Ottawa with Director Clark, whose response was, we are facing significant budget increases over the next foreseeable future. And I said, what do you mean by significant? And his response is, double digit is significant. So I think the reality is, when we consider budgets going forward, we're going to see the need double-digit budget, whether we like it or not. And this is one of the items that plays into that, is however aggressive we get is going to, if the right word is exasperate that. We have to balance it with the ability to rebuild reserves, which aren't there, some of which are in negative balance. So I think it's many balls in the air, so to speak, as we look at juggling priorities and the difficult task of bringing in a budget that is realistic but addresses the deficits that have been built over the years. So that's my editorial comment from some private conversations in Ottawa. And if I misrepresented your comments, Director Clark, I'm just trying to manage expectations as we look forward.
Just before we go to you, Councillor Wilkinson, I just want to make a quick comment. I do see that there are delegates putting up their hand, or not delegates, that there are members of the gallery putting up their hands. The cutoff to delegate is before the start of the meeting. Our procedural bylaw is quite standard. As with many other municipalities, including the region of Waterloo, we do not allow delegates to walk on the floor. You have to register the start of the meeting is the deadline. So I just want to clarify that. Councillor Wilkinson.
Through the chair, to, I suppose, Director Mullenhuis or Director Clark, what are we spending on this at present?
Through you, Mayor. So just in terms of the capital plan, I mentioned historically we would have been in the range of, $500,000 or $600,000 annually in our capital planning related to what would be surface treatment roads and hot mix asphalt roads. And so last year in the capital budget, we started to load almost similar to this scenario where we are seeing a phased step in of more funding levels. And so what we have loaded in the past year, in the past budget process, would be very close to what you're seeing here in terms of scenario 3. And we could be looking at something on the back end that's a little different, but certainly with what you see in terms of the phased approach in the capital budget process, you're seeing something that's very similar to scenario 3.
Councillor Martin.
Through you, Mayor Salonen, I'm not sure if this question should go to Acting CFO Clark or Director Mullenhuis or both, but I'm interested that you're recommending scenario 3, and I'm wondering how it fits in terms of best practices of other municipalities or across the province, just in terms of road maintenance and road reconstruction. And then the other part of it is, were you recommending this given our current state of the way our finances currently are, or were you recommending scenario 3 because of it fitting with the best practices across the province?
Through you, Mayor, the recommendation really is a result of trying to balance the need for funding, and we recognize that there is a challenge now. What we're trying to do is be realistic in terms of what's appropriate to not only to complete in a year, but we do need to look at when we get larger size contracts and multiple different types of contracting scenarios. We do need to look at staffing resources to address some of those, and so that's really what phasing would bring forward, so that we can start to plan a little bit better and adjust as we need to as time goes on. In terms of how it relates to sort of other municipalities and funding scenarios, I can't give you any straight answer on that as far as what what is consistently applied across the province, but I would tell you that we are certainly underfunding our capital needs in terms of the road asset, and we can see that in terms of our decreasing condition.
We'll go back to Councillor Martin for.
So then, through you, Mayor Salonen, so then really, if we're underfunding, would scenario 2, or just as some of my colleagues are saying, would it be better to be more aggressive than to go with scenario 3?
Through you, Mayor, just as Director Clark had noted, we really were looking for some direction here so that we can come back to you in the budget process. What this really serves to show you is sort of a snapshot of here's the condition of your road network at the network level, and if you would like it to get better, we can certainly do that. We just need the money to do it. And so this is presented to you with a couple different options so that you can see what we consider something reasonable and we can manage. And yes, there is a bit of a dip in terms of the condition, at the onset, but it does increase in terms of quality of your road network over time. But there are other scenarios here that we could be more aggressive to address the backlog. And so that's really what, this isn't something that we'd be looking to, I'll say, have council, adopt in terms of a process, but we would like some direction so that, if we do know that you endorse a certain direction, then we can now follow through and plan for that in our budget process and return to you in our capital planning process, and we can show you maybe even between the two, scenario 2 and 3, if we're going to put some funding at the front end, we want to see, a specific dollar amount, and then that can be something that you see through the in context to the entire capital plan and the entire budget process. So I think what I'm hearing here is that there is a desire to maybe be a bit more aggressive. And so we can look at scenario 3 and maybe add a bit more aggressiveness to the front end of that and return to council in the budget process if that suits the wishes of council.
Thank you, Director. And excuse me, we will not take any delegations. We are not following the Roberts rules. We are following our procedural bylaw, and Roberts rules are something that we can consider. However, we are not considering that at this time, and I have already provided that information. If you choose to continue to speak, I will ask that you be removed from this evening's meeting. So, can we please get security? So Councillor Wilkinson, I believe we were on your question.
Thank you. Through the chair, so to sort of refresh or recap where we are, I know we're discussing the options here in front of us to repair and maintain and make improvements to our existing road network. I think we can all agree it's rather important, and this is one of the things that the township is tasked with doing, so it is very important. And I think the other thing that I'm getting at and what I'm trying to make a point of here is that it's important that we weigh the budget costs and the costs it will have on our tax base. So what I'd propose right now is an amendment to the motion that we ask maybe staff come back and cost two options for us. I would propose option 2 and option 3, bringing those back as capital options with the budget. To Director, or Clerk Bunn, is that fairly clear in terms of direction? Director Mollenhuis, does that make sense? Okay, so I'd be looking for a seconder on that.
Moved by Councillor Wilkinson. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Sadhu. Discussion on the amendment, which would be to get two options priced out. Councillor Martin.
Through you, Mayor Salonen, I think we've had some discussion, and I realize a member of the community was wanting to contribute to that discussion. If you want to talk later, I'll help you find, we can bring your points forward at another meeting following the rules of council. So if you have points you want to make, we're not trying to be rude to you. From our point of view, you were being rude to us. I'm willing to help you. You can make a delegation later, so we'll look at budget time on roads, and but you have to follow the time limit. And so I think this is a good way to go. I just wanted, speaking of respect, I wanted to be respectful to what Director Mollenhuis was bringing forward, that if you were recommending option 3, but it seems like, yes, you think it would be good to be more aggressive, but you're recognizing what's the reality of the financial situation we're dealing with. So if you think, Director Mollenhuis, this is a good way to go, I'm happy to support this amendment.
Director Mollenhuis.
Through you, Mayor, yes, I can confirm we can certainly look at both options, and that's something I think just as far as capital planning goes in terms of roads, that's reasonable, and it may be a bit more work to look at in detail, but that's not something that we see as a significant challenge to the budget process.
Okay. Any other comments or questions on the proposed amendment? Seeing none, I'll call the vote on the amendment. All those in favor? That carries unanimously, and in that case, I will call the vote on the whole motion as amended. All those in favor? And that also carries unanimously. On to item 13.3, and that is that staff be directed to establish a site alteration program, including undertaking stakeholder consultation, bylaw enactment, and outlining resourcing needs for implementing in the 2025 Township Work Program. And this is in relation to the fill bylaw proposal I brought forward a while ago. To get this on the floor, may I have a mover, please? Moved by Councillor Wilkinson, seconded by Councillor Cressman, and I will turn it back over to Director Mollenhuis to introduce the report.
Thank you, Mayor. So this report, as mentioned, is in response to a motion presented at Council in late May of this year, which directed staff to investigate the feasibility of implementing a bylaw to regulate site alterations in the township. In summary, staff see this as a best practice given the potential of development fill placement within the township, and so we do see this as something that we can look to include in the 2025 work program to implement. There are a few things to do in terms of homework and looking at some of our regional partners that do have these systems already set up. So there is a learning curve that we can work with our peers on and certainly get something in place. However, we do need to look at stakeholder engagement and consultation, and then return to council with a bylaw and other items. So. In short, yes, we do see this as something that's feasible in the 2025 work program, and that's the recommendation of this report.
Thank you very much. Any questions, Councillor? Councillor Cressman.
Yes, through you, Mayor, to Director Mollenhuis. Looking at one aspect part was enforcement, bylaw enforcement and specialized training. I was wondering if there was an opportunity to utilize working with another township that already has it in place to defray their costs and defray our costs, because I'm not sure how frequent we would need a on-site bylaw enforcement, but would it make sense that we share that resource with another township in the region?
Through you, Mayor, that's something that we certainly can discuss with, we've had some really good conversations with Woolwich, who is, I'd say, in the infancy of their program. I think they've been about 2 or 3 years in terms of their bylaw. That is a conversation we can have with them. I would expect, though, most of the field activity will be a construction inspector type role. We do already have a construction inspector role. There's also a development technologist role that we recently have hired, and so that's another role that would probably integrate into the bylaw process. So I'm not sure exactly how that might look, but that's something we can investigate and report back on. My understanding, just from the initial conversations, is that the technical staff are the ones actually doing the detail of enforcement, but they have support from their local bylaw staff. So we will report back on that, though, when we do.
Councillor Cressman.
Further, the one piece in here that I didn't see, and I, again, was in conversation with other rural townships, is the fact, well, through you, Mayor, sorry, the fact that any existing site, you couldn't make permitting retroactive, and I think we all are observing a site that we see near the Baden Hill and the wall of fill that is being hauled in there and altering that site. So is that true that we can't, a new bylaw prevents us from addressing existing sites that are being altered?
Through you, Mayor, I think that's a question we would engage our legal, just in terms of how that looks, so we can provide a response to you when we do return back with our bylaw and the consultation and stakeholder engagement. I can't speak to to what that looks like exactly, as I don't know at this point. We do have more homework to do on this topic, and certainly we will report back on that.
Councillor Martin.
Through you, Mayor Salonen, thank you, Director Mellenhouse. I was glad to hear when you said you have more work to do. I was trying to read through and understand this, and I appreciate, Councillor Cressman, you bringing up the Baden Hill, because that's an area that I've wondered about too. All the fill that seems to be going in there, and I'm not really clear, how does that work? Where does it come from? What is that going to do in the long run? So that's the kind of thing that I think is important to work at with such a bylaw, and to make sure that we have some teeth or some enforceability.
Oh, sorry, Director Mullen.
Yeah, I should mention, sorry, through you, Mayor, I should mention that in terms of site alteration, there are a number of different elements that are looked at. And so when you look at something that's currently occurring, there are still regulations that have to be followed by whoever is undertaking movement and fill activities. And so in particular, the excess soil regulation, there's a lot of documentation and paperwork that has to be done to confirm soil quality and the type of soil that's being moved and track and measure and whatnot. So there is still, I would say, if there is fill activity taking place today, there is still oversight through other, we'll say, regulatory forces. My expectation would be that no, if there's fill that has occurred or placement of fill that has occurred, that's not something that we would be retroactively looking to or be able to address. But again, that's something we can certainly answer when we return back to council.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Through the chair, I share some of the same concerns and thoughts with my colleagues here, but question would be, I guess, looking at this, for maybe the smaller landowners out there and regular homeowners. I mean, we're not talking about necessarily overreaching into what they can fill their garden in with and things like that. Just to be clear, do you have a rough idea in terms of what you're looking at or what scale in terms of the fill we'd be looking to regulate?
Through you, Mayor, yeah. So I think just from a high level, they would be significant fill operations is what we'd be looking to, likely to regulate through a bylaw. I can't speak to specific numbers, but from what we've seen anyways, that seems to be the bulk of activity you're looking to address is, what we would consider, it's called a cut of soil from a different location and moved, so filled at a different location. And so that's typically related to development activity or could be a road reconstruction type activity. And so those are significant in terms of volumes, and they typically affect farm properties. So that's really what I think, just from an initial review, that's really what the focus of this particular bylaw would look to address. We do have other situations of folks that may change their grades if they're in sort of a plan of subdivision, and we have, I guess, different means of addressing some of those. But again, that's a lens we can look at through, I guess, the next phase of reporting back, and we can give you an answer on whether it's something we would look to enforce through the site alteration bylaw for a smaller size or not. So yeah, we will have to report back to you.
Councillor Martin.
Through you, Mayor Sallin, I sorry to delay this discussion, but you've all, with your last point, I realized I've had a number of conversations with people where their neighbors are emptying their swimming pools, and according to the one person, there has been an alteration of their lot, and it no longer drains the way it was supposed to drain when the lots were first, it's not the word excavated, whatever, approved for planning, I guess, when the lots were first approved for planning, and then later things get changed, and then the swimming pool gets emptied and it goes into the neighbor, and the neighbor is upset about that. But is that a different topic, or would that actually fit into this category?
Through you, Mayor, yeah, I would believe that emptying of a swimming pool would be a different topic, potentially. But to speak to that point, though, when we do have I guess, plans that, there is a grading plan associated with a particular property. Historically, what I guess the way we viewed that is that's a private matter when someone does change grades that they're legally required to or supposed to follow. And so that's something that we would refer to sort of a private legal matter, and not something that I don't think necessarily would be part of this. Again, we do need to do quite a bit more homework on that front, and we will report specifically back to council on how that, or if that fits into to this process.
Any additional questions at this time, councillors? Seeing none, the motion is on the floor that staff establish this program and bring it back, and implement it into the township work program. May I call the vote then, I guess? All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. Great. On to report 13.4. The recommendation is that, actually this is a long recommendation, it's attached to your agenda as seen. May I have a mover to get this on the floor? Moved by Councillor Cressman, seconded by Councillor Martin. And again, we will be going back to Director Molynhuis.
Thank you, Mayor. So this is a report for our wastewater network. Similar to the roads need study, it is a network level sort of review, but it is also more detailed in terms of inflow and infiltration investigation and studies that we've been advancing over the last few years. So that's something that I believe we started in, I'm going to say the 2019-2020 range to start looking in more detail at inflow and infiltration. That's just for short. We refer to that as I&I. So we've been looking at that more closely over time and trying to work to reduce inflow and infiltration within our sanitary sewer system. Ultimately, when we do have these additional flows come into our sanitary system, it's not good from a capacity standpoint, and it certainly costs us money to treat. So that's something that we want to limit and reduce as much as possible where feasible. So that really is I guess the crux of what we've been investigating and looking at in more detail the last few years, is trying to drill down and look at these locations for for what we would consider to be rehabilitation work. And so that, when you look at this report, there's recommendations that speak to operating and capital programs that we do not currently have, but we knew eventually we'd have to get to, and likely should have had a long time ago, to address some of these issues. And so that really is what this report speaks to, is that there's an operating and a capital need related to rehabilitation programs, things like sewer lining and maintenance hole, patching, could be a sanitary service lining, or it could also be the main line that we would have to look to programs. And those are significant expense and annual based programs, but they do have, we'll say return on investment in terms of increased capacity in our system, and then also in reducing our cost to treat groundwater that flows into our system. And so you can see the outlay there, just in terms of what the mayor had mentioned. There's a significant recommendation, a long recommendation, I should say. And so I'm not going to go through all the projects that we would like to have included, but that really is the intent of this report, is to get it in front of you so that we can integrate this in the capital and the operating budget process moving into the 2025 budget process. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Councillor Cressman.
Through you, Mayor, it talks about laterals that need to be repaired, and I'm trying to get a handle on, is a lateral a connection to a home, or is so that's where, and is that where we're finding in older settlement areas, that's where there's significant I&I?
Through you, Mayor. So yeah, it is, to your question, it is a connection to a home. So it's when you have a mainline sewer that runs within the roadway, it's the service that goes to the property. And then between the property and the mainline sewer, it connects the two. Anytime you have connections within the sewer system, there's joints there that, gaskets and stuff like that, that could wear over time, or maybe weren't installed properly when they were first installed. So then those connections are usually where we see things like leaks and coming into the system like that. So that's really what we're looking to address. Those particular areas. Is it common for leakage at those locations? Yes, it is, and so that's something that again, there's I'll say a multi-pronged approach to address some of the defects we are seeing in the system. We do have older systems, or they're getting up there in terms of their age. So, they are at a good age, though, to address through some of these rehabilitation efforts rather than full reconstruction, because obviously a full reconstruction is quite costly, and we want to limit those those types of activities where we can, if we can extend the useful life of the asset. That includes things like laterals, that includes things like maintenance holes, and it also includes things like mainline sewers. And so that's what these programs really speak to, is trying to address extension of the useful life of the asset and extend out the major cost reconstruction as far as we can.
Follow up for Councillor Cressman.
Yes, through you, Mayor. In looking at some of the diagrams, I was surprised to see, I was surprised to see some main trunks going through backyards, and then the laterals kind of coming in the back. And then I thought, yeah, these are older buildings in the heart of New Hamburg, and likely they had septic systems at one time, and this is how they were addressed. So the question I have is, the laterals then become the cost of the homeowner to repair? And do you do that by water usage in a given area, how much water is used and how much flow is coming from that area? And then you've got to almost do camera work, residence by residence. Is that the process?
So through you, Mayor. So as far as the laterals, there is a portion that is the townships. It is under our ownership, and typically it's viewed as property line. And then there's a portion that's on private property that would be the property owner. It's their portion to operate and maintain. When we look at what this would be focused on, I don't have the full details, but I would expect that it will be on the township's portion, and it will be the cost of the system to address. If there are already private property sort of, we'll say, issues, then we would work with the homeowner, and that's typically, these are projects that aren't just, something you see someone show up on a street and then do some work and then you don't know what's occurred. There is typically engagement and discussion with property owners because there are potential impacts, and we do want to work with them on maybe some stuff that they're seeing on their property as well. And as you mentioned too, there's some services that are in odd servicing scenarios, so there may be a side yard service or something like that. And so that's really what, there's a good portion of the work that deals with property owners and engagement with them through the process.
Any additional questions at this time, councillors? Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair, just more of a general comment. This one looks to be more, again, it's like we're looking at sort of these initial figures that are coming forward and that we're going to expect to see these in the capital project, obviously still subject to change pending approval of the capital budget. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor, yeah. So again, it would be subject to the budget process. I would suggest that these obviously are funded through user fees, so it is a bit different in terms of the tax scenario, and there is a bit of a different scenario too in terms of return of investment. So there's other things that in terms of that, but we are looking at trying to get the detail of these projects put into our capital budget, and yes, it would be subject to council approval through the budget process in the end.
Through the chair, as a follow-up, there was talk of potentially needing additional staffing. Would some of those additional staff required also be funded through the wastewater funds, the reserves, or is that something that would then we'd be looking at as an ongoing operating cost to the tax base?
Through you, Mayor. So in general, when we add more programs, we do see that there are staffing needs to support the programs. Obviously, you need more people to do more work. In terms of where we are today, we do see that the programs that we're going to be presenting in the capital budget and then the operating budgets, we are going to use this next year to see how it works in terms of workload, but my expectation is that we are right-sized for where we are and the work that we need to do. In terms of the funding scenario, we have been looking at, I know we talked about IDCs in previous, interdepartmental charges in previous budget processes, and we are looking at sort of I'm going to call it a more common way to tie services and operational costs to capital needs. So that's certainly something that I think we would report back on. I can't speak to a timeline, but yeah, they could, as far as the work we have presented with these reports and what you'll see in the budget process, I don't expect you're going to see any staff requests, at least for 2025. And certainly when we look at long-term planning, we can address that in the future when we know what workload looks like and what how much of the complement is utilized through the course of this year's oncoming budget.
Councillor Cressman.
Yes, I don't know if I find this intriguing because I have to look after my own septic system on the farm, but anyhow, the piece that I found as a priority area was Stonecroft. As a relative new development, I found that interesting that it was a priority area. Is it because just that we have to check it out, or was there issues there that we are aware of?
Through you, Mayor, so that, I guess, just in terms of the I&I and the more detailed review, like I said, 2019, 2020 ranges when we started looking at things in more detail. And so we kind of look at it at a higher level, and we look at, some of our main trunks to see how responsive they are to wet weather events, and we look at them for dry weather events as well, and we sort of compare the two to look at some of the details of system response during a wet weather event. That particular area was one that was noted early on in our review process. We do have a few other neighborhoods that that also have the same sort of response. And so just getting into drilling down into more detail through these last few studies, yeah, that's something that we have identified through like flow monitoring and monitoring the system, that there are increased flows from that area. I would make a comment on, we'll say, private property construction of what in condo scenarios might be sort of like a sewer, and maybe is something that falls under a different code, but we do try to maintain a level of quality. However, we don't have the same oversight or same control over what happens, so there are chances of, chances on the private side that could occur where there are more opportunities for inflow and infiltration. And so that's something that we do need to look in a little bit further and see what's reasonable in that case.
Any additional questions, councillors? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. On to report 13.5, and that is our year-end operating and capital report. I will turn it over to our Director of Corporate Services, Greg Clark.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So this is the report for the year ended December 31st, 2023. This is not the audited financial statements. I want to be clear about that. This is based on budget approval and the way that we cash budget with some incorporation of PSAB standards, but the financial statements based on 100% PSAB will be coming in September 9th. They should be presented to council. So this is, as the motion says there, we had a overall deficit of $15,000 split between tax and our non-tax entities. So our tax supported came in at a positive surplus of $186,000, and the major offset was our building department and a deficit of $167,000. And a couple of items that I did highlight in the report is we had a positive variance from investments. And so as we all know, historical interest rates over the last 2 years, unseen in probably close to 25 years, as well as borrowing through the region for a number of large capital investments that the timing of borrowing preceded the time of construction, allowed us to make some exceptional returns and significant interest surplus. However, it was offset by a little bit of under collection in terms of some rates and building permit issuance and a few other things there. And the big thing from this report is that some of those unexpected surpluses in revenue are not really sustainable. We've already seen the Bank of Canada cut rates twice, 0.5%. It's expected that they're going to cut again come September and continue to cut through 2025, therefore reducing our potential returns. As well, we have spent a significant, basically the balance of that debt that we took on through the region to fund those significant capital projects, and so our debt balance, or our funding balance, has also decreased. So the amount available for investments reduced, and the amount we're earning on that is reduced. So that being said, this is 2023. So the other big caution I want to make is that we did correct for some of this through 2024. I know council went through an exhaustive process at the beginning of the year, did a number of adjustments, increased a number of items, and addressed some concerns. And so I'll be bringing a report also in September. Hopefully we'll get it all put together of where we are currently year to date and address some of these concerns. So I do want to caution that it takes time for these things to flow through, and I know there's been numerous conversations around the state of our budget and finances and the impact that's going to have on budget. And I really want council to understand, barring my conversation with Councillor Crespin at AMO, I understand the challenges that we're facing, and I really want people to take away from this that we need to evaluate the foundational position of our budget. And so there's a number of things in here that I think are percolating to the surface. There'll be more things through 2024. And then the second report I'm going to talk about in a minute, once we deal with this one, I'll also address a few things. But this is really starting that foundational conversation around where are we going with our finances. This is where we are right now, and then the conversations through council regarding the rate of tax increase, the priorities of spending, things like roads investment, facilities investments, staff investments, service enhancements. Those will be the conversations we bring back through budget. So this is just that first piece to introduce council to what I'm seeing and where we're going.
Thank you very much. Before I ask for questions, I realized I forgot to get this on the floor. May I have a mover? Thank you. Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Cressman. Now questions, if anyone has them. Okay, seeing none. I did just have one question adjacent to this about the audited financial statements. Do you have an anticipated time frame of when those are coming back?
To you, Madam Mayor. My expectation is that we'll have those all wrapped up and back September 9th with a presentation from the auditors as well.
Very good, thank you. Seeing no additional questions, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. On to 13.6, and this is the long-term financial statements for reserves, trusts, and debt. May I have a mover to get this motion on the floor? Moved by Councillor Wilkinson, seconded by Councillor Sadoo, and I will turn it back over to Director Clark.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So as I just mentioned, this is the second part of that conversation around setting the foundation of where we currently are. And the key thing to highlight out of this report is that, and I think most of council's been aware of this, our reserves are not in a good state. We have minimal amount of funding available within our reserves. One thing you'll notice is the change in the way that we present our reserves. Historically, we used a practice of showing them with all of the committed or budgeted funding removed from the reserves. In my experience, that's not best practice. So what I've changed is that you'll see the reserve balance reflecting the actual available funds, and then a commitment showing you how much of that is actually committed to actual projects. And that gives you a clearer picture of how much cash we have on hand, and then how much projects we have to do with that work, or work we have to do with those funds. And in my mind, it gives you a bit more of an insight into what maybe potential flexibility you may have, but also demonstrates the limited amount of funding we have. One other thing to keep in consideration is our use of debt. Coming back in September, there'll be a debt policy that will address some of the concerns I have around the level of debt and how it relates to our income, our own source income, our revenues that we generate each year, the level of debt that we could potentially use in the future, and how the trade-off between debt and reserve funds needs to be evaluated properly to make a good decision. So this report isn't exhaustive in terms of benchmarks and targets and, ratios, but those things will come through the policy, and then we can start to apply those to our current situation. This is really just a bare bones presentation of where we are currently at the end of 2023, what we have in our reserves, and where we're going from now.
Thank you. Councillor Wilkinson.
Through the chair to Director Clark, I realize what I'm about to ask is probably a big ask or an unlikely scenario, but I'm curious. I know you made comment that this truly is a reflection of cumulative decisions of previous councils and administrations. How far back did you dig? I mean, is there a key point in time that we can look at, or any particular policies that you would attribute to causing these problems?
Through you, Madam Mayor, to the councillor. I don't really want to dig into the how, what, and why, other than, there's a impact of keeping tax rate increases at a low level. So there's a trade-off. If you don't increase taxes, that means you're giving up something. You're not investing in something. You're making a decision. And so ultimately, those decisions were made by previous people. And that's really all I'm going to say about that. My perspective is, going forward, we're starting at a point in time, and I had a councillor once say this to me, and it really resonates. The best time to plant a tree was 30 years ago. The second best time is today. So I can't go back and replant the tree, but what I can do is encourage council to plant the tree today. And so jointly, we'll look at different strategies on how we move forward and how we improve the finances of the organization and how we make different decisions, potentially, or we continue on a certain path. That's going to be all the decision of council. The word escapes me, but as we get into budget, that'll be up to you guys about how you want to proceed and how you want to move forward from where we are.
Councillor Cressman.
So I'll ask the reverse of the question that was just asked, through you, Mayor, is realistically, you would see us taking X number of years to work our way to financial health, and that X equals with proper decision-making.
Through you, Madam Mayor, to the councillor. My experience is that if it takes you 10 years to get somewhere in a negative situation, it probably takes you close to that to turn the ship around. These things don't turn themselves around much quicker than the situation we got into, and that is a part of this conversation with council. How quickly do we want to move things? How, where do we want to get? And those will be the transparent questions. But you're right, and I'm not going to say a date where we'll be financially healthy. My goal is to point us in the right direction, and then council helps us decide the pace at which we move in that direction.
Any additional, Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair, I look forward to September 9th and the upcoming budget deliberations, but I appreciate you setting the foundation.
Any other questions then? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? And that carries. And on to report 13.7, and the recommendation is that council receive report COR-2024-43 be received, and further that draft council discretionary expense policy be adopted as attached to the report. May I have a mover to get this on the floor? Moved by Councillor Sadhu, seconded by Councillor Martin, and I will call back up Director Clark.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So this came from a previous council meeting with direction to bring forward a policy that helps outline the discretionary funds that were approved as part of the 2024 budget, so $25,000, and how we move forward on allocating those to council. The draft is that 50% of that be moved to council, and then how council be directed to manage those funds. And so right now we've used an allocation basis where we allocate out a portion of those funds for each councillor, and we lay out a number of eligible expenditures and ineligible expenditures and different policies around who needs to approve or sign off on those various expenditures throughout the year. And so this is based on work that our Clerk Bunn undertook and looking at a number of other policies across the province and other municipalities, and is very similar to numerous other municipalities and how they manage those discretionary expenses for council.
Questions, councillors? I'm just hearing a lot of humming over there, Councillor Wilkinson. I don't know if that's leading up to a question. Councillor Sadhu.
Yeah, just one for clarification. I see for business meetings and hospitality, it mentions the AMO conference. Is that separate from like the conference and the hotel and the arrangements, or would that be taken out of these funds, or is there a separate line item for that? That's what I'm just trying to find out.
So if I heard you correctly, you're asking about if while you're at AMO, you wanted to entertain or do something over and above?
No, so as it sits right now, if councillors are to attend AMO or Roma, are those funds going to be taken out of this pool, or is that a separate pool, is my question.
Okay, through you, Madam Mayor. No, we do have a budget for conferences and training, and that would stay the same, and standard conferences would go through there. This would be over and above that.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Through the chair, I know that there's a note in here about the discretionary fund was set and essentially split between council and CAO. What I didn't see is there a policy that defines what the CAO is able to spend discretionary funds on, and who administers that?
So, through you, Madam Mayor, to the councillor, the CAO's discretion to spend funds is embedded within our procurement and operating bylaws, and basically lays out the situations in which you can use those funds, and then the authorization in terms of expenditures based on our procurement bylaw.
Through the chair, with regards to discretionary spending and on these items, can we expect to see a detailed report back to council on what was spent and where, and how often do you anticipate that would be coming forth?
So through you, Madam Mayor, to the councillor. Typically, this is part of the year-end council remuneration report, where we would report back to council on where funds were spent. And in my experience, same happens with the CAO's discretionary funding, that at year-end we report back to council, unless there's something significantly different than normal course of business type of events that we need approval because it's over and above the budget or it's outside of normal business. Typically, it would be once a year that we would report back unless directed differently.
Additional questions at this time? I do have some questions. Going over this, it's a little bit beyond what exactly I was asking for. So from the discretionary funds, going back to the conversation that council had in public during budget, was we were talking about what was going to go into the discretionary. So I was also a bit confused to see things like council going to, like, doing professional development or attending conferences. Why is that in there when we have a separate line? I'm just not certain what the above and beyond exactly would be.
So obviously there's a number of council, or a number of conferences that are geared towards municipal councils, Roma, AMO, and those are expected and budgeted for normally. This would cover something that is outside of those normal business practices, and what it's trying to do is ensure that the business of the township is being furthered through the expenditure, so that the expense and the conference align with those practices. And I do acknowledge that this is probably a little bit more exhaustive than initial conversations, and part of that came from the fact that two considerations. One is that obviously we need some control and approval of spending, and we want to make sure people stay within budget and that there's proper authorization. But then there's also that aspect of ensuring that they're eligible expenditures from a corporate perspective. And so we took the opportunity to include both, to make sure that we're both providing for that approval, but we're also providing for that direction and clarity. And obviously this is for council's consideration. If there are things that you don't feel are appropriate in this policy, we can easily take them out and put them into a different policy, put them into a different consideration. If you want changes, we're here to listen to your feedback on this policy.
Also getting into the policy in terms of its reimbursement structure, I do just have questions looking at an equity lens, and that makes a very large assumption, whether it's this council or any future council, that that individual has the money to upfront and then get a reimbursement. It's been an issue on many boards that I've sat on. I'm curious, I certainly appreciate and understand the reimbursement structure, but I'm curious on the flexibility in having wording that the expense can just simply be paid through the township versus having to go through a councillor and put a financial expense on someone when we're making assumptions about their feasibility to do such.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I do hear that, and I know in other municipalities I've worked in, we've looked at situations where the expenditure is over a certain threshold, being able to advance the individual to cover fees in advance. So that is something we can take away and look at adding that to the policy, that if we set a threshold and say any expenses over this amount can be reimbursed in advance based on approvals. I think that's definitely something we can look at adding.
I guess that still doesn't necessarily address the heart of the problem if you're going with a threshold. I'm saying, is there not a function where, say, I as the mayor am looking to do communications, speak to the CAO, they then have the communications invoice billed. So say it's an ad in the paper for a town hall or something I want to do. Hypothetical, I'm just saying, like, again, you're still creating a threshold and a barrier, and certainly when we're talking about equity issues, people who have to ask are less likely to ask when there's barriers put in place. So if it's a smaller expense that, we might say $200, we don't need to go, but we're then making base assumptions on people, and it's potentially limiting people's opportunity to participate and engage in the space. I'm just wondering why we'd be looking at a threshold and why we couldn't potentially have an avenue should a councillor want to use it. Like, I'm not saying get rid of the reimbursement, but I'm saying to also have an avenue that if a councillor should want to, that they'd be able to get essentially our purchasing to purchase it on their behalf or pay the invoice of the service.
To you, Madam Mayor. Let me take that away and I'll discuss with Councillor or Clerk Bun and we will come back to you with a recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Also, oh no, sorry, I lost my spot here. Are there any other questions while I'm trying to find my spot again? Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair, not a question, just a general comment. I think in general, I'm happy to see this report come back and structured the way it is. I was concerned, obviously, at the last meeting, we didn't want to come away with a discretionary fund that could just be used willy-nilly. This at least sets definitions and barriers. We'll likely review based on the expense reports after they come back. But I think you've done your homework and I appreciate you coming forward with this. So thank you for that. And it at least sets a reasonable limit and expectation as to what we can spend the funds on.
I do remember what I was going to ask. My additional question was just on the charitable component, and I recognize, I believe it's alluding to and referencing like community events that are a charity event where you need a ticket. Just wondering if we can have clarity that obviously we won't be putting public funds towards a fundraiser. One thing if you're showing up in a capacity as councillor and you have to pay, so I suppose an example could be Interfaith Counseling had their gala dinner. It was a ticketed event. If you're showing up in your capacity, sometimes, generally actually, your ticket's covered. I just don't want to see public funds going above and beyond a ticket price for fundraising. And I know provincially and federally there's a lot of legislation around politicians not being able to do that. I would just like some clear wording if possible in there. That we can't donate to an actual fundraiser with public funds, if that makes sense. Or looking for, I guess, your thoughts on that.
Through Madam Mayor, I think that's the intention of the ineligible piece of raffle ticket silent auction, but we can definitely, we can add some clarity to that to say that, you know, the base cost of attending the event is eligible, but anything over and above that is not.
Very good. So with that, since you guys are taking back some things, would you prefer direction to approve and bring back? Or would you prefer kind of a referral? Defer to the next meeting with additional information. So that's the suggestion of staff, is to defer to the next meeting, that they'll then provide the additional information that has been asked this evening. Any questions or comments on that? Would somebody be willing to move that referral? Moved by Councillor Wilkinson, seconded by Councillor Cressman. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. And on to the bylaw part of our evening. The recommendation is that the bylaws as attached to this agenda be read a first, second, and third time and finally passed in open council. Before I do that, I am aware that we do have a resident who would like to speak on the particular item under 14.1 being our bylaw. So Barry Wolf, if you would like to come up, you will have 7 minutes to speak.
Yeah, it's only 8:45. Stand up, stretch. You're going to need it because they appear to 11 o'clock making amendments.
We're not at the 7th inning stretch yet.
Thank you for appreciating my attempt at some degree of humor. Good evening, Madam Mayor, councillors, administrative staff, and citizens on camera. In this proposed bylaw, rules of procedure, our clerk, Jeff Bond, has done an admirable job of beginning the task of identifying the categories and observable behaviors that are desired in this corporation's procedures for conducting meetings and making decisions. It needs noting that these proposed rules of procedure describe how meetings of council are organized by using an agenda, who can add topics to an agenda, and what is the latest time for adding topics or deleting topics on agenda. Today it was real late. Who is permitted to speak at council? That is, how do they get on the agenda? Who makes the decision whether they can speak or not? When and for how long and how often they can speak at council? Who decides what topics or items may be presented at council? Who decides what support materials are permitted in a presentation? And how far ahead of a meeting one must submit an application to speak and present support materials for approval? I suggest to you that the citizens of Wilmot have expressed strong concerns about how councils have communicated with its shareholders, and without changes to this bylaw's wording, these concerns will continue. Without these changes, the township's name on the street will continue to be Will Not Township, because due to unreasonable conditions and rules restrictions, it will not let you speak to council. There is a perception, based on reality, that the existing rules of procedure prevent citizens from speaking rather than facilitate opportunities for constructive input to council for decision-making on topics that are the lawful responsibility of and under the control of the Township Corporation. I'm going to demonstrate how the organizational structure of the corporation and the rules and procedures have resulted in an operational culture, a culture which has inverted the authority of council into one office, which is optional in the OMA, and which also inhibits the ability of citizens to reasonably participate in council's decision-making process. I've identified items which are contradictory or in conflict with one another. That is, one item which requires an action is contradicted in another clause. It happens a few times. I summarized these conflicting clauses in my accompanying handout, which you've all received and hopefully received with all the red lettering. These contradictions create confusion and must be amended tonight, I believe, to have a successful bylaw. I'm going to identify role responsibilities which I conclude are dysfunctional for an efficient and effectively operating operation. I'm especially incensed about a clause which permits one office holder to arbitrarily remove another official from their duties and to place themselves into that role. As I stated in my handout, in Wilmot we do not allow folks to anoint themselves king, and we do not permit one optional administrator to arbitrarily appoint themselves all the authorities and powers of another compulsory official, specifically to make themselves the clerk. It's wrong. That sentence must be eliminated. I postulate that assigning powers and authorities into one rule has over many years here in Wilmot resulted in communication problems. The flow of information and directives through one rule has created a structural filter, a censor, or a blockage of communication. In a recommendation, not all alternatives are presented, and therefore you end up with misinformation by omission. It has been stated that he who controls the flow of information controls knowledge. He who controls knowledge controls power. The flow of communication is constricted and presently controlled by one office. I have suggestions. By increasing the lead time when draft agendas are proposed, preferably up to 25 business days prior, which is practical given that all staff operate per their annual and monthly work plans as specified in the strategic plan, more lead time is given to all shareholders and staff. Events are predictable. By increasing the number of roles who can construct an agenda to include the mayor, all councillors, and this will appeal to Mr. Barton because he was going to advocate for one other member to be able to be on the agenda. For the mayor, all councillors, the CFO, the CEO, as well as the clerk, can ameliorate that constriction in the communication flow. My councillor or mayor must be able to put me on an agenda, the same for every Wilmot resident here. Decreasing the obstacles and increasing the opportunities for citizens to be placed on agenda will improve council's decision-making potential. There's been a gradual cultural change in this corporation such that the duties and powers as mandated in the Ontario Municipal Act have been turned upside down, and the administrators have come to be perceived as the leaders, the policymakers, the direction setters, the arbitrators of what best for the township.
Barry, I'm just going to caution you on not getting into derogatory comments about staff.
I didn't refer to any specific staff.
I know,
I'm talking to roles.
Just saying in broad strokes.
It's a role. The OMA says that the opposite. All administrators are hired. The mayor and councillors are elected by the corporation's shareholders and accountable to us. Look around you here tonight. There's some concerns. I'm hopeful that council will take the opportunity tonight at this meeting, this is not 11 yet, to consider these improvements and put those and others of your own into action by making line-by-line amendments to this proposed bylaw. I'm hopeful that council will then serve notice of motion that the amended motion be brought back to the next meeting of council 2 weeks from tonight, September 9th, for further consideration, and then pass it as a bylaw, an amended bylaw at that time. Clerk Jeff will guide you through the process if anyone needs confirmation of procedure. You've received and reviewed your copies of my proposed amendments, so no more about that. And I'm not going to bore you with the slides that I attached. I'm willing to take questions. And I will pass along my comments to Jeff for publication in full as part of the attendance. Any questions?
Thank you, Barry. Councillors, are there questions for the delegate this evening? Councillor Cressman.
Through you, Mayor, I was surprised with your thought that a CAO could be hired out of the clerical pool. I think on page 5, you talk about that, and the clerk is all powerful, and yet the CAO hires the clerk. I found that an inconsistency in your argument. I understand each has a distinct and separate role, but I see the line responsibility is the CAO is the one individual that council actually responds to, and I would see the clerk as the referee, a proper operation of council, that one that understands the rules backwards and forwards.
Could I invite you to put on slide 6 out?
I do just want to caution both the councillor and our delegate that this is not getting into a debate. If there is a question there,
Okay,
please ask.
The question is, I guess, that obviously you don't hold a CAO in high regard.
That's not true.
And I'm not going to allow that question. That's getting into identifiable individuals.
Well, I'm just saying in terms of his presentation on page 5.
No, that's not a fact, and I would like to rebut that, please. Slide 6, please.
I will give you the opportunity, but please, like I said, let's all not debate, and we're not identifying individuals.
This is my diagrammatic representation of how a municipality is organized under the Ontario Municipal Act. There are certain roles that are compulsory under the Municipal Act. One, a corporation does not exist unless it has shareholders. And we each pay about $1,400 a year in taxes as our shareholders' investment. They are at the top. It's the raison d'etre for the existence of this corporation in the first place. Next in line is the Chief Executive Officer per the Municipal Act, which is the mayor. The next in line of responsibility is the Executive Board of Directors. That's you. The next in line, by requirement of the Ontario Municipal Act, are what I call the 3 Ps. P1 is the pen, the clerk. P2 is the purse, Chief Financial Officer. And P3 is the protection officer, that's the fire chief. Those are the things that a municipality has to have to operate as a corporation. All other roles are optional. If you read the Ontario Municipal Act, it says that a municipality may hire a CAO, and the CAO does not have any specified qualifications. You may hire a CAO. You could call that CAO a township manager. They could be hired out of a clerical pool, whatever you will. I was being somewhat sarcastic, a little stretching, but I got your attention. So it is an optional role. You can exist as a corporation without it. Efficiently, you need to have a clerk because they keep all the notes. You have to have a CFO because they keep track of the money.
Barry, I think that you
There's your
answered the question. I would like to remind everyone in terms of what's germane to the topic, and it is the amendment to our procedural bylaw to bring in allowing delegates to speak. We're not doing a public review, organizational structure review at this time. Are there any other questions, councillors, pertaining to Mr. Wolf's delegation? Okay. Oh, Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair, I was curious to maybe gather more information regarding you mentioned here 4.23.1 and talking about preparing agenda for council meetings. I'm maybe curious why you've sort of identified so many different members to contribute here, what the purpose of that may be.
At present, to get on the agenda, according to the rules of procedures, an agenda item the agenda is created under the pen of the clerk, which is presently in this organization under the direction management of the CAO's office. So your agenda that you see for meetings, council meetings, committee meetings is different, but for general council meetings, the agenda is created by the CAO's office and the clerk. And if you take track of all the events that tend to be on this is probably the first meeting where the CAO, due to the CAO's particular absence, but presentations have been made by individual directions. Reports have been presented. Traditionally, reports tend to come through there. So getting on the agenda to be able to appear here, the rule is it's got to already be on the agenda. That's a conflict because the only people who will put it on are the clerk or the CAO. So if you want to be on the agenda, I call my ward councillor, which is you, Mr. Wilkinson, and I say, I got this topic, and it's under the power and authority and control of the township, and it's a special interest item. I'd like to be put on the agenda for my 7 minutes. You could do that with this amendment. If I called my mayor, as I did on Saturday, when I called the mayor and did a little lobbying like the CAO's office does all the time with you, I too do my lobbying, and everybody else is entitled to do their lobbying. I invite the mayor, maybe I want to get a topic put on by her. Very seldom when I call the clerk or the chief financial officer, probably, but it's the potential is there. If they have a topic they want on, they don't have to go through the CAO or the clerk. They just said, I have the authority to. My priority is, I want you to be able to put an item on the agenda so that I, at any time, don't have to wait till the time of the year when some CAO or clerk decides it's appropriate. Or, if the agenda is changed, because you can change an agenda in four hours, right? You can change, and that happened today. I get up and I read, whoa, there's something being dealt privately, the statutes. Whoa, that's done in closed session, I understand that, but that's, any late minute addendum can be put on, or if she's on the agenda, it can be unilaterally changed with 4 hours of notice. So that's an issue, and that's why I'm suggesting the amendment of 25 days prior notice. It's practical, it's possible. All you got to do is follow your strategic plan. All you got to do is look at your work orders. All you got to look at your work plans. They exist. Everybody has to comply with them. They all have to be in every year. They have to be checked off every month.
Thank you.
You know what you're doing.
Thank you, Barry. Any other questions for our delegate this evening, councillors? Okay. Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair, I don't have any further questions. I'm more so interested in maybe having debate or conversation on where we go with here, because I
still need to get it on the floor, and then we were going to have that. This is just our delegate portion. So, seeing no more questions, thank you very much, Barry, for coming in and for sharing your very detailed comments in advance as well. It's appreciated.
I'll be back when it comes to restructuring. You can count on it.
Okay. So, councillors, to get the current motion on the floor, I'd be looking for a mover. Moved by Councillor Sadhu, seconded by Councillor Wilkinson. Just so that everyone is aware, the update that is in there is in relation to allowing up to 3 delegates at each meeting speak on items that are not on the agenda, and then the rules surrounding how they would register and what the process is if it's oversubscribed. So that is currently why this is being brought forward to us tonight, as about a year ago we did a full in-depth review of the procedural bylaw. However, I am happy to open up if councillors do have questions of the clerk or want some debate. Councillor Sadhu.
Thank you. Obviously, selfishly, I would want this to move forward because it would be my emotion that we would be voting on. Obviously, now that you see some stuff in here, and particularly one item I was hoping for is the agenda being issued more than 2 business days before a meeting. Essentially, my question is to Clerk Bunn, is there a timeline that we can open up this procedural bylaw again, or is it we can open it up and make changes whenever we wish?
Through the mayor, it's council's bylaw, and you can update it as many times as you'd like, as frequently as you'd like. I would, just with a caveat, I would say there are 2 main staff-initiated reviews of this. Typically, it's a good best practice to look at your bylaw at the first few meetings of a new term of council, typically in the first 2 months, and you provide updates and changes from a staff perspective, but then you're also seeking the input of the new council on the rules that would be governing their meetings. And then likewise, typically you do a review midway through your term as well. I can say that I started just shortly after your term, so we were kind of online for that. So the next big scale review would be in about a year and a half from now.
Councillor Wilkinson, was that going in for a question?
Through the chair, I'm trying to recall, when did we last review this? I know you said you started roughly...
Around the same time last year. It was 20,
okay.
The bylaw numbers are almost exact.
Okay. I mean, through the chair, I'm looking at this and I'm also reviewing the suggestions made by our citizen and my constituent here. I think there's a lot of interesting points and some points of clarification here that we could definitely take back and maybe consider. You know, I don't know what would be preferred if we talk through maybe all suggestions, maybe not all of them, but you know, there's a variety of things here we can make amendments to this evening, or is it more preferred that we send maybe back direction to say, hey, could you explore what some of these options are, come back to us in a couple weeks' time, and then provide some expanded research or suggestions based on the feedback you're getting here. Because I do think reading through this and hearing some of the concerns firsthand, that there are some valid points here. And I know I particularly am fond of looking at getting meeting agendas published well in advance of the current date. You know, we get an agenda on a Wednesday evening, sometimes a Thursday, and that doesn't allow a ton of time to really consult with constituency and stakeholders that you would rely on for information. So the sooner that we can expand that process and have more advance notice and time for input, I think it's beneficial to the electorate as a whole. So I'm curious your thoughts on that, what you might want to see taken back as a review process. And prior to answering, just one other general comment, I agree. My colleague, Councillor Sadhu here, put forward a motion that I seconded. I think it's rather important that we get those special interests put through. So I don't know if this is something where, again, we potentially make sure that that happens this evening and then still ask for a review back. So perhaps there's an amendment there to be considered. But I'm curious your feedback.
I think that Director Clark is going to chime in.
So through your councillor or mayor to the councillor, in terms of agenda timing, that's something Clerk Biden and I have talked about. I come from municipalities where the agenda is out much more in advance, and Jeff also previous experience in City Kitchener. And so our current thought process is, with the new calendar coming out in January for next year's, that we would implement a new timing as well for agendas. And so that work is already well underway, and I think you're going to see some things that you've been looking for in terms of notice and advising the community about what we're going to be discussing. In terms of concerns about the current bylaw as it stands, one of the things that I'd like to remind council is that the way that this bylaw came forward was a notice of motion put on the agenda by a councillor that then led to discussion that directed staff to do work that brought back a bylaw. That is the way that municipal government functions. If council has a desire to see staff do work then what we look for is a notice of direction or some other indication through an agenda that they're looking for something to be answered or investigated or brought back to them. And they can put that on any agenda they want. They can bring those issues to us, and then that opens up the opportunity for engagement with the community about that conversation. My concern with opening up who within the administration can bring items and do that, while it might seem feasible in a small organization, as you get larger, the difficulty of administrating that and keeping that under wraps and keeping things under control and keeping things simplified and process driven to getting to the clerk and getting an agenda set becomes more and more difficult. So while I understand the concern of the constituent, I do think there is an avenue for council to bring items that they're being raised to them, and that is a notice of motion. And I think this bylaw that Clerk Bunn has put together also addresses the opportunity for constituents to step up at any meeting and express their concerns. And I think it does drive that. I'm not saying that the items that Mr. Wolf have identified are not without merit. I'm not disagreeing that. I'm just thinking we need to think about where we've gotten today, because I think this amendment to the bylaw is a huge step in the direction that council was looking for, particularly councillors to do in bringing this notice of motion forward.
Thank you, Director Clark. I do just want to clarify, as there was an incident in the council chambers tonight regarding anyone being able to step up at any point in time. The limitation is that you have to register at the start of the meeting before the meeting starts. So just want to clarify that there are no misunderstandings or misinterpretations. So, I mean, with that, I would probably lean towards Councillor Wilkinson. It sounded like you and Councillor Sadhu, and I can't speak to the other two councillors as you've not spoken on the topic, but perhaps suggesting breaking out the vote. So one would be to pass as amended and then have staff report back if on whatever topics you're specifically looking for. I'm just offering procedural suggestions, but also happy if other councillors have questions or comments to throw in. Councillor Sadhu.
Yeah, so essentially my thinking is I would like to have my cake and eat it too. So just to have this passed, but now that I see this information and I read it, I mean, I'm sure Barry has done his research, but I would like the clerk to do a deep dive, and he is the expert, to basically look at what's being brought forward and do a deep dive and see if it is actually something that is common practice amongst municipalities, and if there is opportunities for us to improve and gain greater transparency. So I would move that we accept the bylaw as it stands and then have staff report back with more research and a report back of potential changes that we can make and that have been brought up.
So you're proposing an amendment then for staff to report back and provide information back to council on recommendations of further best practices. Is there a seconder for that amendment? Seconded by Councillor Wilkinson. And Councillor Wilkinson, you can speak to that.
Through the chair, if I could offer a potential friendly amendment to that, I think in particular, just based on reading through the document that's been prepared by our citizen, Mr. Wolf here, I think there's some legitimate concerns brought forward, and a lot of it has to do with language. So I don't know if it's undue, but I think it's reasonable to ask Clerk Bunn, could you investigate what he's suggesting here and report back? Is that agreeable? Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? And Councillor Martin.
Through you, Mayor Salonen, I appreciated your comments earlier. When Mr. Wolf was speaking, it would be my belief, and maybe Councillor Cressman, this is where you were going with this. It seemed like Mr. Wolf was trying to make some criticisms of the CAO, and So I guess I'm curious, as Councillor Wilkinson and Councillor Sadhu are asking for the clerk to go through this, what is it that we're going through? Are we talking about the wording on particular items? I'm just trying to understand, what is it that we're trying to see would improve our bylaws? Yeah, so I guess personally, I wouldn't be that interested in changing the seating. I wouldn't be that interested in, like, the duty of members. It seems to me that there are various ways that people can put things on our agenda. And as Director Clark had pointed out, Councillor Sadhu, you actually put this on the agenda. And so that seems to regularly happen. So I'm just wondering, would there be a way that we could qualify what would be some of the wording or some of the procedures that we're really asking our clerk to do?
Just before we jump into that, this is where I'm about to speak about this. Yes, I'm about to address that right now. That is why I am speaking about it. The only thing I would say is, just like I won't allow residents to criticize our staff, we can't be criticizing or putting words into the mouth of our residents.
I was talking about the CAO as a role, anywhere in any council for future, not even
Yes.
a particular person. That's a misinterpretation of what I said.
Yes, and you were clear on the role element. I just want to clarify for everyone as we are speaking going forward on this debate, as well as the delegate is no longer at the microphone. So, Councillor Wilkinson.
Through the chair, I think the purpose here in looking at this is I'm inclined to agree with some of the assessment and the materials in terms of the way that our business is structured. I agree as well with Director Clark in terms of getting items on the agenda. We can do so through a notice of motion. But again, I think, is there potentially better ways for us to do that, or other alternatives for us to do that? So I'd be curious in seeing if there is further research or best practices that exist. And I think it's fair to say, okay, this is a criticism, not even a criticism, but a commentary on what was being proposed and what we currently govern our business through. Can we ask the clerk to address and maybe review these items? And I don't think it's unreasonable to look at all of them and just say, hey, these are the options. But I think in terms of structure, I view it the same way, is that we are shareholder driven. We are representatives of the shareholders of this organization. And this potentially offers some commentary on how we can better govern the business that's conducted at the township. So I'm curious to learn more, and I would leave things in the role of the clerk, and then based on his report back, we can have a more robust conversation in potentially 2 weeks' time.
Canada has Competitions Act, abuse of dominance is one of the topics.
Okay, so we're going to research Councillor Wilkinson, I believe it was back on you again.
Through the chair, thank you. I think ultimately what I'm looking for, Councillor Martin, and I'm looking for cooperation amongst us here, is can we potentially look at this and say, are there suggestions here in general, without going through each line at the moment, and get feedback from our clerk who does specialize in this area, and say, are there areas where we can potentially improve this procedural bylaw? I believe reading through the language, there can be, I think some of these items as well were pieces that we actually brought up and discussed when we did the initial review. So I'm just curious to get more feedback, some research, and then have a more concrete discussion based on a report back to us in, whether that be 2 weeks' time or 4 weeks' time, but at some meeting in September. This way we can still ensure that the special interest meetings and general interest delegations are added, so that we can move forward with the bylaw I think we all agreed with. But also this is potential, does this offer us opportunity to be trailblazers in terms of offering better access to government, more transparency, and really make sure that we're conducting business on behalf of the individuals we represent. So I'm just looking for more information, and I think it will allow us to have a better conversation in a couple weeks' time.
Councillor Cressman?
Yes, is there a potential to divide these two to handle the?
So that is actually, oh, I see. You want two separate votes versus just the amendment?
Well, I'm thinking that the bylaw that we're contemplating is one step that I think there's general consensus on, and the importance of getting it passed. And then we could have a separate debate strictly on how extensive a review we want in terms of, I see those as almost two distinct items.
So what I would say, since we have the amendment on the floor, is that we vote on the amendment. If it fails, then it's not going forward. If it passes, then I'm happy to split both items into two separate votes, if that's your request. Any other questions or comments on the amendment? Councillor Martin?
Could you reread the amendment, please?
Yes, I'm going to have the clerk do that if, as he has some writing there. It'll just be a moment. Well, the clerk is just clarifying the writing, or the wording, sorry. I'm happy to throw in my 2 cents. I have some, I guess not concerns. I'm not as concerned with some of the language and wording as it is best practice and pretty standardized. There are some that I do think that there's room for improvement, and I appreciate when people do point that out. So I would be curious what a clerk's interpretation of that would be. I, like you, Councillor Martin, the seating and a few of the other detailed items, I'm not as concerned or interested in. However, I do think there is certainly some validity that I wouldn't mind just hearing from the clerk at a future meeting their interpretation of. But that's my 2 cents. Do you have wording now, clerk?
So through you, Mayor, to the rest of council, the motion that we have right now is the original motion that the bylaw be passed for first, second, and third reading, and then the amendment that council amends the motion to add that council directs staff to report back on municipal best practices and recommendations, including the delegation heard by B. Wolf at the August 26th regular council meeting, and to present those recommendations in a report.
Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair to Clerk Bunn, is September 9th sufficient time, or looking at the calendar, do you feel September 23rd might be?
Through the mayor, I would recommend the latter, only because I think if we want to give it fair justice, it takes time to look through an abundance of procedural bylaws across the province. And I think, taking the time when we looked at the general interests and specific interest bylaws, it gave us a very good result. We were able to look at a number of municipalities, find what looks to be a best practice and what works in other places, and bring that forward here. And I would like to have that same opportunity to come back with any recommendations that may arise from Mr. Wolf's presentation. I think being able to afford that time gives us a better result in the end.
Through the chair, I could offer an amendment to the amendment, or if it's agreeable through my colleague, I think I'm inclined to honor the request there to go to the 23rd, given that there's some holidays and other events coming up through September. I'm not sure.
Councillor Sadhu, is that, okay. So
friendly to the
23rd.
23rd.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on the amendment? So this is on the amendment component. I'll call the vote. All those in favor? All those opposed? And, okay. That does carry. Now we will separate out the two. So first we will vote on passing the bylaw this evening with the changes to allow the additional speakers on the item. So what was originally presented on the agenda. Any other discussion needed for that at this point? Nope. Just let me clarify. It has already been moved and seconded, so all those in favor? And that carries unanimously. And then on the amended component, I already have a mover and a seconder, so I will call the vote. All those in favor and all those opposed. And that carries. Okay. We have no notices of motion this evening. I do have a list of announcements, so it's good to see that there's still a gallery here, as well as those online. As you all leave, okay. So the second week of September is recognized by the Government of Canada as Mennonite Heritage Week. This is an opportunity to learn more about Mennonite Canadians, their unique history, their vibrant culture, and their contributions that have helped shape our country. The last Castle concert is this Thursday night between 7 and 8 p.m. on the front of the Castle Kilbride lawn. Admission is by donation, and Kettles On, a trio of Celtic musicians from Stratford, Ontario, will close out another great year at the concert at the Castle. And I would like to say a huge thank you to all staff who have made the concerts a great success yet again this summer, and of course to all the residents, especially those who were bearing through our construction to come out to the concerts still. Labor Day is September the 2nd, and just to note that the township offices will be closed to recognize the statutory holiday. The first day of school for elementary and secondary students is Wednesday, September the 4th, and Wilmot Council wishes all students and education workers a safe start to the school year. World Suicide Prevention Day is on September the 10th, and Interfaith Counseling Center and Wilmot Family Resource Center are hosting a walk for reflection and awareness at 7:15 until 9 p.m. at the Wilmot Recreation Complex. The next free coffee house talk for adults 55 and older living in Wilmot and Wellesley townships is happening on Wednesday, September the 18th at our local Royal Canadian branch in New Hamburg, Legion in New Hamburg, and that is from 10 until 11 a.m. We have whimsical weekends at Castle Kilbride that start on September 21st, and one weekend a month, families are invited to attend Castle Kilbride's Whimsical Weekends, which is a guided 30-minute tour of the museum and fabled exhibit co-curated by Stratford Festival Archives, and finish off with a fairy tale inspired craft. There are 2 weekends this is running, and that is September 21st and 22nd, which is Pixie Dust Bottles, inspired by Peter Pan, and October 19th to 20th, which is Masquerade Masks, inspired by Romeo and Juliet. The Wilmot Family Resource is celebrating 30 years of their Poor Boys Luncheon, which is happening on Thursday, September 26th at the New Hamburg Community Center. Be sure to mark your calendars and visit the Wilmot Family Resource Center website to learn more. And my last item is that the Township of Wilmot is hosting a National Truth and Reconciliation walk again, which is in partnership with Crowshield Lodge, the Wilmot Family Resource Center, and Waterloo Oxford. So please do save the date for Monday, September the 30th from 6 p.m. until 7:30 p.m. There will be more details shared shortly, but it will be building on the walk that we had last year. Councillor Cressman.
Yes, I think it would be appropriate that council extends its condolences to Councillor Dunstall in the passing of her father and the funeral that occurred today.
Yes, thank you very much. And Councillor Dunstall, yes, we have, I believe, all privately extended, but council and staff do acknowledge your loss. And are there any other announcements at this time? Okay, seeing none, we do have one item from closed, and that is respect to item 6.1 on the closed agenda dated August 26, 2024, and that is that staff be directed to proceed as directed. And further, with respect to item 6.2, that staff be directed to proceed in regards to the storage of the Prime Minister's statues. May I have a mover, please? Moved by Councillor Wilkinson, seconded by Councillor Cressman. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. Our confirmatory bylaw, may I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Wilkinson. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. And adjournment. Moved by Councillor Wilkinson, seconded by Councillor Cressman with that zeal there. All those in favor? And we're adjourned. Thank you.